Every day, companies collect a staggering amount of information online about their customers, with almost every business using some form of digital technology. A handful of firms, which epitomize these new technologies and which dominate our daily routines, are keeping policymakers up at night, leading to some tectonic shifts in the design of international taxation. My name is Alpa Shah, and I'm an economist in the Fiscal Affairs Department at the IMF. Over the last decade, the international corporate tax system has come under intense scrutiny. Many countries are waking up to the fact that the world's most highly digitalized companies are generating eye-watering profits and stock prices, and many have even flourished during the pandemic as activity has shifted online. Yet, they pay minimal taxes, if any, in the countries in which they operate. And this has raised some profound questions about the fairness of the current international tax system. So how did we get here? Well, it began in the 1920s with the League of Nations. As the world globalized, nations agreed that the country in which a company's profits were generated, the source country, would have the right to tax them. However, to have this right, the company had to be physically present in that country. Business models were, of course, different back then. Previously, you couldn't show films without a movie theater in every town and city. Whereas now with Netflix, we can stream remotely movies directly to our living rooms. And in recent years, we've seen a huge surge in such remote sales globally. Just take a look at what's happened in the US over the last 20 years. And in addition to selling without any physical presence, companies such as search engines, social media platforms, and e-commerce retailers are also collecting vast amounts of personal data on their customers as they consume digital services. This data is then processed and monetized via personalized advertisements or by improving services and developing new products. So this data is therefore significantly contributing to these companies' profits, and some argue without adequate compensation to the users. And governments can't tax this value either, not only because these firms are not physically present, but because user data is not recognized as a source of value under the current tax system in the first place. And these firms may also even be escaping tax under the current tax rules, as they make heavy use of intangible assets, which are hard to value, making profit shifting easy. Over the last decade, global discussions coordinated by the OECD and the UN have been underway to reform the international corporate tax system and address these issues. In the meantime, countries across the world are looking for their own solutions. Many are introducing digital services taxes, or DSTs, on the turnover generated from specific digital services, for example, online advertising, or the use of online intermediation platforms. These types of taxes can be imposed without changing existing tax treaties or rules. So let's evaluate these new taxes in more detail. First of all, what's the rationale for these taxes? Well, since data is currently not recognized or remunerated at the individual level, it's easier to think of data collectively as a national asset, like oil in the ground. And so we can think of the DST as a royalty levied on its extraction. Next, are these taxes efficient? Well, we usually prefer to tax profits or rents to minimize distortions. High taxes on revenue rather than profits can discourage activity and investment. The design of the tax is important too. Recent proposals have tended to single out certain digital activities. Yet many businesses collect personal data, even, for example, airlines, businesses, and retailers. So as companies across the economy become more and more digital, the borderline between taxable and non-taxable activities might shift quite rapidly. Governments should also be aware that, as with all taxes, companies may pass them on to consumers, depending on their market power and how sensitive consumers are to price changes. For example, when India introduced its DST, Apple, Amazon, and Google all announced price increases in response. Netflix, however, did not. Lastly, will these taxes raise much money? Well, it may be too early to tell, but estimates currently average less than a tenth of a percentage point of GDP. So, as they're currently designed, it's very little. At the same time, digitalization is only set to increase, and so with a wider scope, DSTs may generate more revenue in future. So, where does this leave us? With digitalization set to increase, it's imperative that we redesign the tax system to accommodate these new business models and make sure that countries can tax them correctly, but without stifling innovation. The international community is currently trying to agree on where to tax profits, but inevitably it hasn't been easy. And while commonly agreed global tax reform is preferable, we're seeing the emergence of these new digital services taxes, which allow countries to be compensated for the provision of data by their citizens in the absence of international reform. They're not without their potential pitfalls, and without sound design, they may create undesirable incentives for investment, generate economic distortions, or increase consumer prices. And as for their revenue potential, the jury is still out. For the moment, they don't seem especially lucrative. However, as users and their data become more and more important, the more valuable these digital services taxes could become.